Hi there, Malcolm here with my 237th Booktube video, and today I'll be bringing you my review for the final Architecture Trilogy by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And these three books are Shards of Earth, Eyes of the Void, and Lords of Uncreation. Now, I've quickly reviewed the first two in some wrap-up videos in previous months, but I've recently finished the third book and I thought, having done a few other trilogy reviews, I'd keep that trend going. So the final Architecture is a science fiction story based on the far distant future. Humanity has reached the stars, colonized and settled in other planets, and met some alien species, most of whom are pretty okay. And then one day, a giant moon-sized thing arrives over Earth and rips it apart. They name these giant creatures architects, and there was a massive war against these creatures, out of which sprang what were called intermediaries, which were special humans who had telepathic abilities, sort of, who were able to communicate to these creatures, let them know that the planets that they are reshaping have people on them, and please go away and leave us alone. Which eventually they did. Now that all takes place before the first book. There was the first Architect War, and the Polyspora of humans living among the stars, having lost their homeworld, along with other creatures have lost their homeworlds as well. Not all of them, but some have been worse affected than others, are just trying to survive, and although have sort of resettled on planets, there is that uneasy tension of will they come back. And the intermediaries themselves have been discovered to have a special ability. In this universe there are what are called throughways, which instead of using a faster than light method of moving from star to star, they cut through what is called unspace, a sort of pocket dimension type thing, as a shortcut. And in unspace are these previously dug tunnels by some ancient species, which are called throughways, and using these throughways they're able to navigate. However, limiting yourself to only these throughways has restricted humanity's movement across the stars, and these intermediaries are able to navigate through uncharted waters, as it were, where there aren't throughways. And most of these unfortunate souls have been indentured to the human government and are effectively slaves. Apart from one, a man called Idris, who is one of the very first intermediaries. He wasn't the first. He fought in the original war, and due to what they did to him to make him an intermediary, he doesn't age, and he also doesn't sleep. And he's one of the few free intermediaries, and he's chosen to spend his time on a salvage vessel called the Vulture God, which houses a crew of misfits, very much in the style of Firefly and other similar stories such as that. And all's going fine until they salvage a particular ship that looks like it has been architected by one of the feared to return creatures. And what unfolds is a series of disastrous encounters, conspiracies, as well as the actual confirmed return of these bloody things. And the second Architect War kicks off. And that's more or less the synopsis of the first book. Eyes of the Void sees Idris being kidnapped and taken to a pretty unhospitable planet where there's a construct made by some ancient beings that allow a deeper view into the unspace territories, sort of like a weird telescope type thing. And the view is to try and find the habitat, birthing place, wherever it is that the architects hang out when they're not ripping planets apart, so they can take the fight back to them. And in searching, Idris discovers something about the architect that hasn't been considered before. And that's more or less the gist of this book. There's lots of other things going on. The crew of the Vulture God have gone their separate ways to a degree and having their own adventures, but the main crux is finding out where these architects are hiding. This is probably the weaker book of the three. It's perfectly enjoyable. It just took a long time for anything to really happen. And when it did happen, the answers weren't very quick to come, because Idris has this big revelation and then doesn't really share it with anybody. It's a really nice continuation, and it does very slowly turn that crank of tension up as the story progresses. And we finish off with Lords of Uncreation, where we find out the truth behind the architects' attack on populated planets. And there's what the architects look like hovering over, I believe this planet is Berlenhof, which is the new main planet for humanity, as the various alien races and the factions of humanity get together after sorting out certain differences of opinion to confront the architect threat once and for all, leading to a conclusion, which I won't give away because of spoilers. But yeah, where the second book dips a little bit, this one really picks up again. A really enjoyable read. And strangely enough, reading this trilogy, I was kind of reminded of Watership Down to a degree, particularly as Idris reminds me a bit of Fiverr, who's a very weedy rabbit not very healthy, but has an insight or some sort of precognostic ability that is able to save the rest of his people. Now, Idris isn't a very physically impressive person, and again, he does have certain insights about what's going on with the architects that ultimately do lead to a conclusion, but of course it's whether or not he gets listened to. Bit of a weird connection, I know, but I couldn't help feeling that Idris is like Fiverr. The other main characters are also really enjoyable. I particularly liked the character of Ollie, who is the mechanic of the Vulture God, and Ollie was born without arms and legs, really, and she doesn't use a wheelchair. Instead, she uses a mechanical scorpion. Because why not? She's got these various connections to technology, means she's able to use machinery very easily. You know, she's the one that uses the remote drones and all that. And she's a number of different conveyances to get around with, but her favourite is this scorpion, which is pretty kick-ass. And then later on, she gets something even more impressive. And her story arc really develops into a direction you're not expecting, and it's fantastic the whole way through. Brilliant character, and she's a no-nonsense, foul-mouthed, angry at the world for every reason going. Yeah, absolutely loved her. We also have Solace, who I suppose is a clone or something like that. There's a offshoot of humanity which was started by some doctor who had an idea of creating the perfect race of Amazonian warriors. These warrior women are nomadic in nature. They don't have a planet that they call home, and Solace has been sent to the Vulture God in view of getting Idris back to her people for their own agenda. And she and Idris have a past from the first Architect War, and she's only lived so long because she's been in stasis. So they froze her after the first war, and they've unfrozen her for this one. Yeah, she's a really interesting character, and certainly I think towards the end of the beginning of the third book, there's a schism in her people, and she's got to choose which side she fights for, if either. Then there's Chris. She is a knife-fighting lawyer. On the planet where she hails from, there are a lot of duels, which is settled by knife fights. Generally non-fatal. It's once first blood has been drawn, then that finishes things. Of course, in her past, she went too far on one such occasion, and is now on the Vulture God. Basically, full-time job looking after Idris and keeping him out of trouble. And certainly the fact that he is the only free intermediary does crop up time and time again as people try to claim him as their indentured intermediary. Very handily, he has his own personal lawyer to make sure he remains free, apart from when he's kidnapped, which happens quite a lot. Yeah, not quite such a character arc, I don't think, but a very serviceable character. And then there's Kittering, an alien crab-like thing called a Hanalabra. And unlike Dr. Zoidberg from the Futuramas, this one actually does resemble a crab. And he very much takes on the role of the R2-D2 and C-3PO from Star Wars. Sort of a combined effort. Does all the things that R2-D2 does, but can talk. And the other major character is a man called Havea Mundi, who works for humanity's government, and basically when everything starts kicking off with this salvaged ship, he's sent to investigate, and then various other things that crop up he's sent to investigate, and time again the crew of the Vulture God happen to be bang in the middle of what's going on. So in one part he's kind of the police officer trying to catch them in the act, as it were, and in another part he's very much their ally, having to help them through the latest scrape that they found themselves in. He's got a really interesting storyline as well, though I would say his agency has a weird story arc that almost feels unnecessary. Again, there was a sort of schism thing that happens even within the first book, but I very much felt like there was some weird politicking going on and some judicial infighting, and we were very much outside of all that. We only saw the peripheral effects of it, and it obviously affected Agent Mundi, but I don't feel like I really knew what was going on with that. Just the end result meant that this happened and that happened, and it affected our characters in this way. And of course other characters come and go, as well as a bunch of other alien species. And there's a species of giant clams that a bunch of humanity believe are gods, and go and voluntarily join the hegemony, which is this sort of sect-like, galaxy-spanning cult of giant clam worshippers from various species, many of which haven't even been encountered by humanity. And of course, whenever they turn up, things kind of go in unexpected directions, which kept things interesting. But yeah, a really enjoyable story, really enjoyable characters. I did feel some of the mucking about in Unspace and the whole concept of it being non-existent and all that got perhaps a little bit repetitive and bogged down, but it didn't really detract from the story. But I did feel like every time that that Unspace was mentioned, it was the fact that this happens and it was like this, and it's like, well, we established that already the first time we went in, and a lot of the third book takes place in Unspace, and I think conceptually I did struggle a little bit to understand just what was going on and where it was taking place, but I was able to follow the story no problem. It got a little bit quantum, if you like. For the whole, I would say all 3 books are booktastic, individually and as a trilogy. I say Eyes of the Void is perhaps the slowest one, with the least amount going on in it, but it's still very enjoyable, and like I say, the characters really make the story. There we go. Have you read the Final Architecture trilogy? Have you read anything else by Adrian Tchaikovsky? What did you think? What's your favourite book by him? If you have one, comment down below, please. Like, subscribe, and other YouTubey things if you want to. And until next time, see you later.